Our first speaker is Dr. Dan Picus, and Dan is the Chief of Radiology at the Mallinckrodt Institute. He is the Chair of our Coding and Nomenclature Committee and leads our team at the CPT editorial panel. He has torn himself away from his new granddaughter to be here, and to quote the Mallinckrodt residents, he is awesome.
Thanks, Geraldine. And good morning. So I'm the one that's still fighting for fee-for-service here. Coding and Nomenclature is primarily involved at the CPT editorial panel, and that's an AMA group. There's, as you heard this morning during Rich's award, there's 11 physician representatives, and radiology is not guaranteed a seat at the CPT editorial panel. We've been very fortunate over the years being represented at the CPT editorial panel by a number of excellent radiologists, including Rich, Kathy Kroll, and Bill Thorworth, who recently retired as the chair of the CPT editorial panel. Just a little primer. I'm hopefully not too basic a level, but I thought it'd be helpful this morning to talk a little bit about different types of CPT codes as we move forward. Everybody knows what a Category I code is. That's what we bill routinely for most of our services, but there's also Category III CPT codes. An example up there, cerebral CT perfusion. There's other examples. And Category III codes are temporary codes that are used for emerging technologies or procedures. A Category I code, and everybody wants us to have Category I codes for all of our services, has three fairly strict requirements. First of all, the service must have been approved by the FDA if it involves a device or drug. The service must be distinct and performed by many physicians, and the clinical efficacy of that service must be proven. And that bar is getting higher and higher every day. Category III codes are much looser in their criteria. Any one of these can be met in order for a Category III code to be awarded. And as I said, they're used for emerging technologies, and they're intended primarily for data collection purposes. They may or may not be reimbursed, and that's important to remember, that Category III codes can still be reimbursed. So how's established efficacy defined for Category I codes? Well, before 2011, it was pretty loose, and it was really sort of whatever you could convince the CPT panel. Starting in 2011, we were tasked with much stricter guidelines for literature requirements, and now we're required to bring 5 English language articles to the panel, and one of these articles must exceed or meet the level 3 evidence. And so case reports, case series are no longer adequate. And so this just points out how strict it is, how strict the criteria now are for Category I CPT codes. It's not a simple matter any longer to get Category I codes. The ACR continues to be busy at the CPT editorial panel. The 2014 cycle just completed, so those are the new codes that will go into effect this coming January. You can see listed there the new Category I codes, as well as a number of other activities. And the highlighted aspect in yellow is that the vast majority of this was resulted due to the mandate to bundle, and we'll spend the rest of the morning talking about that. The majority of our work at CPT is now related to bundling. Bundling is combining existing CPT codes into new standalone CPT codes. And so what's up with all this? What's up with all this bundling everybody keeps hearing about and what we've been suffering with for the last several years? Component codes are widely used in radiology. People think about component coding as interventional radiology coding, but it's actually much of what we do. CT, ultrasound, nuclear medicine, and even in the plain film area uses component coding. It allows an accurate description of complex services. Many different services can be provided with a small, or described with a small code set, and it allows us to accumulate data regarding exactly what it is we do. However, CPT and RUC are very hostile to component coding, and it's viewed by many at CPT and RUC as a way of gaming the system. The internists come and say, well, I get a single CPT code for seeing a patient for 45 minutes in the office, and look at all those CPT codes you get for reading a CT scan or doing a interventional procedure. The primary driver for bundling is the CPT RUC work group that's called the RAW, the Relativity Assessment Work Group. And this group was put together probably about 5 or 6 years ago now to look for opportunities for savings in the Medicare physician fee schedule. The RAW developed a series of screens, and you'll hear about all sorts of screens that are done. And the one that primarily relates to bundling is a screen for services that are performed frequently together. And the idea being that if you find services that are performed frequently together, there has to be savings, is the rationale, by bundling those codes, since there must be overlapping work. The first screen that was developed was a screen looking for services performed 95% of the time together. And frankly, it's pretty hard to argue if you've got services 95% of the time together, that are performed 95% of the time together, it's pretty hard to argue that those need to be discrete services. That morphed into the 90% screen somehow. No one really knows how it went from 95 to 90%, but it developed into a 90% screen. And these were the bundled codes that we've discussed the last several meetings that resulted from that screen. Note that it really resulted in a lot of hard pain for radiology, but for many other specialties as well. And the cardiologists, who were also quite high up there on Geraldine's salary slide, have seen a huge hit regard to bundling of all their cardiac catheterization codes. The ACR fought long and hard against these mandates, and in many cases we were successful in delaying these efforts to bundle our codes for several years, but eventually the pressure was just too much and we had to go along with the bundling theme. The 90% screen was so successful that the RAW developed a new screen for services performed 75% of the time together. And this really found the vast majority of the interventional radiology codes, many codes in radiation oncology, and many other specialties as well. So the new bundled 75% codes were CT angiography, renal angiography, IVC filter placement. These are sort of old news. The new news for this year are cerebral angiography codes that are now bundled into a single code, and a variety of other interventional procedures. I can tell you that for 2014, the news continues, the drumbeat continues for bundling, and these are the new bundled codes that will be on the horizon for January 2014, a complete redoing of the breast interventional codes. Embolization codes are now bundled, abscess drainage, and vascular stent placement. Future families that are mandated for the next several years in CPT include DEXA, myelography, vertebroplasty, the whole family of biliary and GU interventions, as well as, believe it or not, hip and pelvis plane films. Well, I don't need to tell you this, but there's a significant impact to reimbursement when codes get bundled. And we'll hear a little bit more about the RUC process from Dr. Silva in just a few minutes. But the valuation of a bundled code is almost always less than the previous sum of the parts. And that's the perceived savings that CMS and others are looking for the bundling process. It's important to recognize that both the professional components and the technical components are subject to reductions when the code goes back to the RUC. There's general agreement that component coding is really no longer a viable model. Any of the new codes that we get going forward are going to need to be bundled codes. We see no future for component codings through the CPT. And the end game that's rumored, no one's come out and said this directly, but the end game that we hear at CPT is that the final raw screen will be for services performed greater than 50% of the time together, virtually almost all of our codes. There's many unintended non-reimbursement consequences that many of us suffer through. We find ourselves with extremely complex, awkward coding scenarios as a result of this bundling. We often can't delete the base codes because they're still performed individually, even though they're performed in a bundled fashion as well. And we lose all ability to track our services, so our healthcare research is extremely difficult in a bundled environment. Well, just to end on a positive note, what else is coding and nomenclature doing for the ACR members? Last year we were successful. Everything's negative. We were successful in appealing a number of onerous CCI edits for a standalone billing of CT abdomen pelvis, guidance codes, and some tendon sheath injections. Also, along with our very talented staff, I want to also say that the staff for coding and nomenclature is just excellent and allow us to do much of what we do, provide educational efforts for the ACR members through a variety of different publications, some of which Diane talked about earlier. So in summary, radiology is facing many challenges with regards to coding and reimbursement in the old fee-for-service model. As distasteful as the process continues to be, we really must remain involved and try and fight every single decision that's being made, and we are. And at the same time, we need to explore other models for getting paid for what we do. Thank you very much.